In the last Great War, almost 30 million Russians lost their lives. 2 in 3 soldiers never came back. Those who survived returned to the ashes of their homes, to the graves of their children, to the memories that would haunt them forever. They could have gone mad. They chose to live.
This past weekend marked the 54th anniversary of the victory over Japan. If you remember, VJ Day is on the 15th of August. I didn't notice much celebration around. I didn't even hear it on the news. But I know that 2 people around definitely celebrated. It was me and the old Marine who once came to me and said, "Proud to be in your presence." At first I didn't understand what he was talking about. Turned out that he was the Marine who fought in the Second World War, who took by storm Okinawa and the hellish battles that were on Okinawa pretty much every American schoolboy or girl knows. But few boys or girls know that after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, the last one was dropped on the 9th, Japan did not surrender. It took the Japan 5 days to make it smile. The old Marine knew what happened then. Unfortunately, I think that most of you don't, and therefore I want to tell you the story. On the 8th of August, just on the eve before the second nuclear bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, Russia declared war on Japan, and 1.5 million Russian troops invaded Japanese territory in China and the Japanese islands from the north. The battle that ensued was the largest, quickest battle that the history knows. Because within 5 days, Russian troops destroyed a 1 million strong Japanese army and virtually showed to Japan that there was no point of fighting. The old Marine knew that particular part, and he was saying to me that it was the Russians who saved his life, because he believed that if he were to storm the main islands of Japan, he would be dead like most of his friends, because even the official projections for the casualties for taking on Japanese home islands was over 1 million American lives. I want to tell you how the Russian army became that strong and why they invaded Manchuria. Please look at this photo. This photo was taken in the middle of Russia, just south of Moscow, in 1935, or 39, in the summer of 1939. Please don't trust the uniform of the gentleman. He is a civilian. He is simply a reserve officer of the Russian army, and otherwise he is running a restaurant. It's a nice Ukrainian family, as sunny as you could possibly think. But 2 years later, and that's their last peaceful photograph, 2 years later, the Germans invaded the country, and by the October of 1941, they were just at the gates of Moscow, and they were about 50 kilometers away from the small city they were living. Being an army colonel, this gentleman sent his family into Siberia on a train, and he was hoping that they were safe. But before he even departed for his regiment, which he was commanding, the news came that the train was bombed and everybody died, because the train at that moment was crossing the river and the train went right into the river. 2 days later, fighting Germans, he stood out of the trench with all his regiment and just charged the German panzer troops. He was cut in half. He died a day later from wounds. He obviously did not have to be in the front line, because colonels, people who are commanding big regiments, are not supposed to be in the front line trench. This man was, and it says to me that he simply did not want to leave, because he was avenging the lives of his children and his mother and his wife. But miracles happen. He was misinformed. Only his mother, the old elderly woman right in the center, died in that particular crash. The rest of his family survived, and they lived in Siberia for the next 4 years, working on farms. This girl sitting next to her father was working on farm first. Then when she grew up to be big enough, she was working on the cartridge factory, making bullets for the machine guns. Here's a photograph much later, in 1953. She grew up to be a beautiful woman, and she's married to this gentleman who also was a soldier in the Second World War. He has an interesting story too, not unlike his wife, because in the spring of 1944 he was sitting in a trench and crying like a chap. He was 19 years old. He already fought Germans for 2 years, from 1942. He saw corpses by the hundreds. He killed so many people he wouldn't blink to kill another one. But he was sitting in a trench and crying, because on that particular day he received 2 letters. One was informing that his father died on the other part of the Eastern Front, and that his mother was killed by Germans somewhere else. He got those letters the same day. He continued fighting. What else he could do? But he was always mindful of his brothers, because there were 3 brothers of his who were orphans in that home. And he was an orphan, and think of it, he was 19 years old. He just lost his parents. He ended the war in 1945 on the May the 9th. And that particular war, in which so many Russians lost their lives, is so ingrained in our minds that on May 9th of every year, the country virtually stops. It stops and celebrates the people who gave their lives for that victory. It celebrates all those who worked on the home front to make that victory happen. And it also, believe it or not, celebrates the contribution of the allies, of the Western allies, that was made to our effort. I seldom hear the credit given to either Russian fighting of Nazis during in Europe, but even less to the Russian contribution to the win over Japan. But I'm pretty sure that if my late parents were alive, and yes, these are my parents, they would bow to that old American Marine, because thanks to him, so many, thousands and maybe millions of Russians were alive.